So it's now 5 o'clock Finnish time. So it's time to start this meeting. And on behalf of Historians Without Borders, I welcome you all to this discussion event where we shall be discussing the modern history and the use of the swastika or the hooked cross. It is a theme that obviously remains very topical in many countries where it is the symbol arouses passions, and particularly in Finland, where we have our own particular history about with the hooked cross. Teivainen will be telling more about this. But just to reiterate the welcome to all of you, and those who are more interested in Historians Without Borders and our work, just access our website, historianswithoutborders.fi, and if you are interested, you can join either the Finnish NGO of Historians Without Borders or the International Network of Historians Without Borders. It is easy to do so if you to just access our website, and if you agree to our declaration and the principles of our declaration, you're welcome to do so. But I will not say more. I will leave the floor now to Teivainen, who will be the master of ceremonies for this event. Teivo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Erkki. So it's really a great pleasure to be here and have Malcolm Quinn as our key speaker today. I'll be also commenting a little bit, but the main responsibility for delivering us new information is by Malcolm. And I think as someone who's, I've been, as some of you know, been quite interested in the swastika and this Finnish separateness claims of our own swastika for several years. And I've also been trying to read international and national scholarship on that issue. And there's a lot of talk and many words written on the swastika, but very little serious academic, theoretically solid reflection on it. And I remember when I found Malcolm's book, I was like, wow, finally, there's somebody who's writing with a solid sort of social, scientific and cultural theoretical understanding of what the debates are about. So we've been communicating very sporadically over some time and talking about maybe organizing something. So now it's really a great honor to have you, Malcolm, here, I hope, and in some future event physically here in Finland, but right now in this Zoom. So without further ado, welcome Malcolm, and the floor is yours. And maybe even before you start your presentation, maybe you want to say a couple of words how you ended up getting interested in this symbol.
Well, thank you, Teivo, thank you, Heta, and thank you, Historians Without Borders, for inviting me to speak today. Really, I began to be interested in the swastika, and then it was commissioned as a book by the Anthropology and Archaeology Department at University College London. So I entered a context in which I was immersed in the theories of anthropologists and archaeologists, and through that I became increasingly interested, as I will tell you in a moment, with Heinrich Schliemann and his excavations at Troy in the 1870s. But in a sense, as I will go on to say, you know, I'm interested in the European context of the Nazi swastika, what it means for us historically, and how we can understand it, you know, even as we are repelled by the crimes that were committed in its name. So shall I begin?
Yes, maybe do you agree with me that there's not that much academically solid stuff?
No, No, there was basically there was quite a good little article on the design of the swastika by Stephen Heller,
Yes,
which
yes,
I included in my book, and then Stephen read my book, and then he wrote his own book. But I think myself and Stephen have been the two people who pursued this most. But also, I think I think we were both concerned to bring a visual and a design understanding to this question, because a lot of what was written about it was about what it means here, what it means there, and we were thinking, no, how do we understand this as a symbol that works across space, that in some senses might even control space or map out a certain space? So I think we were together on that one. I don't think anyone had looked at the swastika as a design issue before he and I had done so.
Cool.
Okay, so I'll begin. When I wrote the swastika constructing the symbol 30 years ago, I included a reference to the desecration of 150 Allied war graves at Nijmegen in Holland. They've had Nazi slogans, swastikas, and neo-Nazi symbols sprayed on them. This was in 1993. At that time, it was also reported that the words Heil Hitler had been sprayed on the entrance to the cemetery. Last year, much later, in response to the arrival of violent extremism, the state of New South Wales in Australia followed the previous example of the state of Victoria and passed a law that waving a Nazi flag or displaying memorabilia bearing swastikas could result in going to jail for a year, along with a fine of over 100,000 Australian dollars. In New South Wales, 31 incidents of displaying the Nazi flag had been reported to the police in 2020, so there was obviously a problem. A section in the New South Wales bill, however, allowed for the swastika symbol to be used in academic, historical, or educational settings, thus allowing for its display by Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains, for whom it has religious significance. A newspaper report on this change in legislation quoted the National Vice President of the Hindu Council of Australia, Surinder Jain, who said, quote him, "For too long, the Hindu community has not felt comfortable to display our symbol of peace because it resembled a symbol of evil. This is no longer," unquote. So here we have a continuity between when I wrote the book 30 years ago and there were these desecration of war graves, and up to this day, the continuing problem of extremist right-wing use of the swastika in Australia. Now, criminalizing the use of the Nazi flag, while allowing for the use of the swastika as a religious symbol by Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains, may be an effective and pragmatic way to contain incidents of right-wing extremism. However, I would argue, and we're looking at history today, as historians, we can't apply this strategy of containment to our historical understanding of the Nazi swastika. We can't simply argue that the swastika has existed for thousands of years, that the religious use of the swastika is the norm, and the Nazi use of it was a terrible exception. I don't think that makes for good history. So what kind of history do we do? In the first sentence of my book, I said that the book was about, quote, the fabrication of a sign of identity in an era when personal and collective identities were being rapidly displaced, unquote. What I was saying was that we have to see the swastika as it appears in the Nazi flag as proposing a particular model of identity in the context of modernity, a modernity in which, as Karl Marx said, all that is solid melts into air and personal and collective identity is at stake. So what I'm saying is, I think we have to see the swastika in the context of identity under modernity, and as proposing through the Nazi flag, a different kind of approach to identity. Cover the next slide, please. Thank you. Now, my main argument in this talk is that the model of identity that is proposed in the Nazi flag offers an absolute racially defined distinction between the victors and the vanquished, the winners and the losers, a division that could not be established in European democracies of the 19th and 20th centuries, at least not politically, but which could be found in the relation of European colonizers to those that they colonized. To understand this model of identity in historical terms, as I've said, it is not sufficient to discuss the Nazi swastika as an aberration in the history of swastika images dating back to prehistoric times. Instead, I think we have to employ the notion of a historical return, what the Martinican writer Aimé Césaire, in his discourse on colonialism, first published in 1950, referred to as a boomerang effect, in which, to quote Césaire, quote, "One fine day, the bourgeoisie is awakened by a terrific boomerang effect. The Gestapos are busy, the prisons fill up, the torturers standing around the racks invent, refine, discuss," unquote. So, the boomerang. For Césaire, the paradox of colonialism is that it brutalizes the colonizer, but this same colonizer nonetheless establishes the legitimacy of their position as a colonizer on a distinction between their own supposed civilization and the supposed barbarism of the colonized. So he sets up this interesting relation. He says, well, colonialism brutalizes you as a colonizer, but this brutalization is done in the name of civilization because we are civilized and the other is a barbarian. So where democracy aims to level out inequalities, Nazism, like colonialism, uses inequality as the basis of a hierarchy. It also goes further by using this inequality as a principle for the foundation of a political community. When Césaire refers to the bourgeoisie who are rudely awakened by this boomerang effect of Nazism, the bourgeoisie is another name for those who negotiate, those like us, you and I, who negotiate their identities under the conditions of liberal democracy. Liberals and Democrats in Germany in the 1930s were suddenly confronted with the new political order of the Nazi flag, which is not simply the identity of a political party, but the model of a political community, founded on a distinction between the victorious Aryans, supposedly, and the vanquished Jewish population. In Mein Kampf, Hitler described the flag in the following way, quote, "In red, you see here, the social idea of the movement, in white, the nationalistic idea, in the swastika, the mission of the struggle for the victory of the Aryan man." Note that word, victory. So there's a victor in the middle of the flag. This is the so-called Aryan man. On August 7th, 1920, at the Salzburg Congress, this flag became the official emblem of the Nazi Party. 13 years later, on March the 12th, 1933, President Paul von Hindenburg and Adolf Hitler issued a decree stating that henceforth, the black, white, and red old German imperial flag of Bismarck was to be flown together with the swastika flag, replacing the constitutionally mandated black, red, and gold flag of the Weimar Republic. On September 5th, 1935, the Nuremberg race laws included the Reich flag law, which declared that henceforth the swastika flag would constitute the official national flag of the German Reich. Moreover, Jewish people were forbidden from raising the new German flag with the swastika and displaying the national colors. So the shock for the inhabitants of a liberal democracy is not simply that they might be included among the vanquished Jewish population rather than the victorious Aryans. It is that in order for anyone to be a citizen of this new Germany, they had to agree with this fundamentally undemocratic distinction between Aryans and Jews. Now, Hitler's account of the inclusion, here we come to the design question. Hitler's account of the inclusion of the swastika symbol in the Nazi flag, his design of it into the flag, is careful to place his own contribution center stage, and also to emphasize his intention to move decisively into a political space beyond democracy. Now, although the idea of the swastika as an Aryan symbol was common currency in Germany before World War I, and also that the swastika had been proposed as a potential symbol of the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei before Hitler joined the party on 12th of September 1919. The difference was that it was Hitler who saw the potential for an image that could work not simply as the emblem of a party, but as the signal of a break with democracy. Not only did he recode the red, white, and black of the flag that Bismarck had chosen in 1866 as the red of socialism, the white of nationalism, and the black swastika of the so-called Aryan man, Hitler went out of his way to emphasize that in choosing these colors, quote him, "We do not desire to awaken from death the old Reich that perished through its own errors, but to build a new state." So this isn't a repeat of Bismarckian Germany. It's using it in some way, overtaking it, subsuming it into a new state. However, it should be noted that while both socialism, the red, and nationalism, the white, can exist in liberal democratic states, the black Aryan, so-called Aryan swastika that is named as the symbol of Aryan man is a deal breaker with democracy. It alone ensures that in the Nazi state, there is a political community of the victors who exist within the law and a non-political community of the vanquished who exist outside the law. It's worth noting that there are many images from the Nazi period that show groups of people who have been marshaled into the shape of a swastika. Hitler Youth in the shape of a swastika, troops in the shape of a swastika, people in the shape of a swastika. This is intended to show that the swastika is not simply a national symbol, but a means of configuring a new kind of political community that separates the new order in Germany from liberal democratic states. So it's not simply a nation among nations, it's a different kind of state among. This new kind of political community is in some ways presaged by Italian fascism. Mussolini had ensured that the fasces, an ancient Roman emblem of corporal and capital punishment, I think someone called it a mobile punishment kit, that was carried before the Roman magistrates and which became the symbol of Mussolini's party in 1922, then became the symbol of the Italian nation in 1926. Unlike Hitler, however, Mussolini went to great lengths to ensure that his party emblem was used to establish the historical continuity of nationalism. Coins were minted in 1922, bearing a supposedly authentic form of the Roman fasces, which according to the fascist newspaper Il Popolo d'Italia represented the emblem of ancient Rome and the new Italy. Continuity, you see. In 1923, at the prompting of Mussolini, Italy's Council of Ministers declared that these new coins would display the fasces on one side and a portrait of the reigning king, Vittorio Emanuele III, on the other. So, although Mussolini's fasces, like the swastika, the Nazi swastika, is intended to convey the principle that might is right, there was nothing about the fasces that signaled the abolition of liberal democracy and the founding of a new political community on the basis of such an abolition. Next slide, please. And that is why, I don't know whether people know this, but there are fasces on the arms of the chair on the Lincoln Memorial. And I think this means the difference between the fasces and the Nazi swastika means that we can encounter the fasces on the arms of the chair in the Lincoln Memorial and read them as conveying the unity of democratic states and the principle of a pluribus unum. So the contention that the Nazi swastika is not simply a party symbol or a national symbol, but the means of configuring a new kind of political community means that we have to be careful how we use the term branding in relation to the Nazi swastika. It sometimes gets used, the Nazi swastika was a brand. Well, no, hang on, let's be careful here. In the title of this talk, I have used the term rebranding, but on the understanding that the change this rebranding brings about is a shift in political, not simply national identity. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, swastikas began to appear on everything from wallpaper to children's toys, prompting Joseph Goebbels to introduce the Law for the Protection of National Symbols on the 19th of May, 1933, to protect the Nazi agenda of what they called national awakening. Paragraph 1 of these regulations states, quote, that it is forbidden to use the symbols of German history, of the German state, and the national awakening in public in such a way that the dignity of these symbols is seen to be lessened, unquote. The regulations put in place a system for the immediate confiscation of unsuitable objects without compensation. So there you were with your swastika football and somebody would just take it off you. And you could be put in jail or fined if you were selling these footballs with swastikas on. However, no restrictions were placed on stick pins or lapel badges. So to put this in its starkest terms, the Nazi swastika, when on the loose in public life in Germany in 1933 as a kind of new Germanic brand that could be applied to any and every object as a way to boost someone's profits, was, in the view of the Nazi Party, getting in the way of their radical project for the rebranding of German subjects within a new Germanic national community in which only so-called Aryans could exist within the law. So commerce in this case was too fluid. They wanted something absolute. This is why you had your swastika football taken away. The name that was given to this rebranding of German subjects was National Awakening, which should be distinguished from the differentiation between national brands that we are familiar with in liberal democratic societies. There is a Finnish brand, there is a British brand, there is a German brand, French one. To take one example of how this kind of differentiation of national brands works in liberal democracy, those of you who, like me, are in middle age, can remember that Audi, the German company, was once advertised on British television with the slogan "Vorsprung durch Technik." While one can argue that after World War II, car makers in Germany became safe, neutral repositories for national pride, but also reshaped the non-German view of brand Germany for the better. We all respected the German car. We all thought that was a good thing. The Nazi swastika does not so much taint the German national brand or diminish it, as propose something which was supposed to supersede and invalidate it. As I have argued, in his description of the Nazi flag, Hitler overwrites the red of socialism and the white of nationalism by introducing the boomerang effect of colonialism, namely an absolute racially defined distinction between the victors and the vanquished that could not have any meaning in a democratic society. Next slide, please. Here are a couple of photographs that I took a few years back, just before COVID hit. There was a big exhibition of the British Museum all about Troy, and these objects from Schliemann's excavations were shown there. They are terracotta spindle whorls from between 2250 and 1750 BC from Hisarlik, Turkey, and they are in the State Museum in Berlin. Now, in the swastika constructing the symbol, I traced the historical trajectory of this boomerang effect of colonialism to the invention of a racially inflected European idea of the Aryan swastika in the 19th century, focusing in particular on archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann's excavations from the 1870s at a place in Hisarlik, Turkey, which he believed was the site of Homeric Troy. At Hisarlik, Schliemann discovered spindle whorls like this and other objects with some spheres with a swastika motif. Intriguingly, he thought they were writing, which is a crazy idea. The Europeanization of the swastika, image of an all-conquering race, focused firstly through the lens of the Trojan War, and also the virulent anti-Semitism correspondent Émile Bourneuf, who the archaeologist consulted on the meaning of the swastika motifs he had discovered. The swastika images of Hisarlik were linked to the word swastika, which is mentioned in the Sanskrit grammar of Panini, the linguistic basis of the Hindu epic, the Rig Veda. In turn, this Sanskrit swastika was linked to Indo-European language theory, which, on the basis of the common roots of Sanskrit, German, Old Norse, and other languages, assumed that they all shared a root language, and then you put two and two together and make five and say, root language, there must have been a root race that spoke the root language. Well, who knows? Evidence of this supposed ancient race was found in the Rig Veda, apparently, which mentions Aryas or nobles who came from the north and displaced the native population. So we see how the boomerang works here. The idea of invaders from the north dovetailed with the colonialist assumption that higher races were the conquerors and lesser races were conquered by them. Schliemann's biographer Leo Duell has suggested that if Schliemann had completed a separate volume on the Aryan swastika as he planned, this might have earned him, quote, honorable citation by the latter-day apostles of Nordic supremacy, unquote. Now that's speculation, but what's important about the swastikas of Troy is the historical return, the boomerang effect, in which the Hindu swastika is Europeanized, racialized, and understood as the emblem of a conquering race. So then it ends up in the Nazi flag. It's already been built as an image of the conqueror. As I draw to a conclusion in this paper, I hope I have sufficiently emphasized that we should see the Nazi swastika as central to a project to use the colonial distinction between the victor and the vanquished, the winner and the loser, as the basis for a new political identity that exists in the space beyond democratic liberalism. In this regard, one of the more interesting citations of my book in the past 30 years is by Michael Dillon Rogers in an article for Modern Intellectual History, 13/1/2016, if you want the reference, on the evolution of political theorist and Nazi fellow traveler Carl Schmitt's thought during the First World War. Rogers makes the really interesting claim that the swastika may have made the difference between the earlier, more liberal democratic Carl Schmitt and the later devotee of National Socialism. Rogers says, quote, in 1915, Schmitt appears to have experienced a Catholic reawakening of sorts through his reading of a pamphlet called Wiedergeburt, Rebirth, by an author referred to only as Mirandason. Rogers claims that Mirandason is not traceable, that Schmitt was referring to an anonymously authored pamphlet called Wiedergeburt, Deutsche religiöse Flugschriften, published by the Deutsche Orden in January 1914. These pamphlets combine militaristic nationalism with Catholic theology and prominently display a swastika design on the masthead, at that time, as he notes, a relatively esoteric symbol of the radical right. Rogers attributes Schmitt's religiously inflected rebirth to Schmitt's decision to embrace the view that submission to the political authority of the state is equivalent to submission to God. The state is God. The kind of state that Schmitt envisions has replaced the flux of identity in liberal democracy with a political identity that can only exist in the space beyond liberalism because it is grounded in a distinction between the victor and the vanquished. Schmitt, the admirer of Nazism, understood this distinction as emerging in a local hegemony, say in Germany, that supports the global order of powerful states. On the other hand, in this paper, following Aimé Césaire, I have argued instead that this distinction emerged in the laboratory of European colonialism. This colonial model of a fixed hierarchy and an absolute identity is what enabled Hitler to propose the design of the Nazi flag that could subsume Bismarck's right within a new kind of political identity that referred to the swastika as a symbol of the victory of Aryan man. One lesson that we can learn from the study of the Nazi swastika that still applies in the 21st century is that political parties that offer a program of national renewal and a return to collective greatness are not simply making a claim on your vote, they are questioning your status as a citizen of a liberal democracy. One thing that we can be pretty sure of is that the cure that is offered by talk of national renewal is always worse than the disease. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Before opening the floor for further comments and conversations, I have a few questions and perhaps to give some background on how the swastika hooked cross debate is seen from Finland. Perhaps one comment with the question is, I remember when reading your wonderful book, I paid attention to not only the importance of this 1871 thing in Troy in Hisarlik in Turkey, where this Heinrich Schliemann found all these swastikas. I was actually there this year to to understand a little bit better that context, a sort of foundational moment, I think, for the modern use of the swastika. But you also point to a Paris exhibition, World Exhibition in Paris in 1889, as the moment where perhaps this, there was this Polish guy called Smidrowski and others who presented these things found in Troy. And you seem to point to that moment as the foundational moment of the modern racist use of the swastika. Yeah. A political coincidence, historical curiosity, and of course there are many, and correlation is not causation. Adolf Hitler was born the same year, and it doesn't really mean a thing here. But the first modern use of the swastika in Finland was by this painter, very important, arguably the most important painter of those years, Akseli Galén, later known as Galén Kallela, who put swastika in one of his works that he prepared in Paris for the World Exhibition of 1889. He actually
I didn't know that.
There.
Whoa.
And so it's kind of intriguing, but there's I've been trying to look like, is there any connection? Did he talk? Did he see what happened and all that? In any case, my point here is that in Finland, especially after 1889, the swastika starts to be discussed among different branches of arts, and of professors of things that are to define Finnish identity, how it comes from Karelian, how it's used in Karelian ornaments, and some debates, some claiming, well, it's not really, it's quasi-national. You claim it's national, some say it is national, and there was this quite rich debate that nobody has really studied here at the turn of the century. My question and my comment here would be that often, even in Finland, and especially in Finland, perhaps the debate is either there's a political use, and the political use is the Nazi kind of thing, and then there's the decorative, non-political use. But in Finland, when you start looking at its use, arguably the varieties of nationalist political way of using the swastika as a political symbol are not necessarily reduced to Nazi or proto-Nazi thing. And there were those women's resistance movement to Russia. And arguably, you put the swastika in a colonial context. You look at the discourse of Finnish nationalist movements there. There are some elements of anti-colonial discourse vis-a-vis Russia and Russian Empire.
All right.
Independence movements use the swastika in their quote-unquote anti-colonial struggle and branding here. You refer to branding here. One of my claims in my book that I'm writing is that there's been this sort of geopolitical branding of the swastika in Finland that has changed. In those beginning until 45, the branding was that we use the swastika to show the world and us that we belong to the Occident, to the West.
Right.
And there were things like Orthodox priests in Karelia who became Finnish, and the church becomes more Finnish. They put swastikas for the priests to symbolize that they are no longer in the Oriental sphere of influence of Russia, but in the Occidental part of Finland. So this was like a really big thing. Then, unlike in most other countries, when swastika was used, where 1930s and at the latest 1940s, just about everybody stops the use of the swastika, but here not. But there was still this idea in the Air Force, for example, where it was quite visible, the swastika, and it was taken off the airplanes. But then 1955, and 56, when it was in Order of White Cross, the most important kind of medal that is given to foreign dignitaries, Finns give this medal to President of the Supreme Soviet Council of Soviet Union, Kliment Voroshilov, and he comes to Finland and he's in a cocktail party hanging out with the swastika thing here, and Finns are like, hey, look, the Soviets don't mind. They don't mind, let's take the swastika back. And then they have, in the coming years, very soon, they have swastika back in the official insignia of the Air Force. So it was like, okay, it's no longer the Russians don't mind. A few years later, President Kekkonen goes to France and gives the same thing to Charles de Gaulle. And then people notice that Charles de Gaulle gets this, and unlike the Soviet leader, Charles de Gaulle goes like, you know, doesn't want to hang out in the cocktail party with visible swastikas. And then Kekkonen, president of Finland, orders, let's take the swastika out of this medal. And I consider this like one of the first moments when Finns realized that the geopolitical significance of the swastika had changed. And in Western European context, it was perhaps even more problematic than vis-a-vis the East. And now Finland, having become NATO country and all that, the Air Force and some other parts of the state are still using the swastika. But there's an interesting debate on that. Just to give one anecdote here of German Air Force and Finnish Air Force 2 years ago had shared exercises in northern Finland. And just before the final moment, the Germans hear that the Finns are gonna put the swastika up for the final ceremony, and they are like, oh, we are Germans, we can't do that. And the Finns are like, no, it has nothing to do with your swastika, it's our swastika, it's our hooked cross, it's separate. So my question would be here on these geopolitical shifts. Two more questions. On the legal debate, it seems because now also in Finland, there's this major or some conversation on whether it should be prohibited, criminalized. And actually the current government has said that they are going to criminalize Holocaust denial. And they are looking at the possibility to criminalize Nazi and Soviet symbols. Probably not gonna happen, the last one, but they have taken this up as one thing. It seems that your position is that criminalizing Nazi use of the Nazi swastika would be quite okay if you don't criminalize the Hindu and the academic and all that. I have tended to argue that I don't want German-style prohibition in Finland. My question is, how do you see this prohibition in the context of Holocaust denial? Maybe I leave it there. I have many others.
I think the issue of whether or not one should follow the New South Wales trajectory. I mean, that's simply a question of management, isn't it? It's kind of saying, well, these people keep displaying this symbol. How do we deal with it? Well, we put a big fine on them or a jail term to stop them doing it. So the effect is to limit the upset and the trauma caused by the display of these far-right symbols to the general population by controlling it in that way. That seems to me to be fairly expedient, but you've also got to allow Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains to use it. I mean, I went to Japan recently. It's everywhere. It's everywhere, the swastika in Japan. You're just, it's all over the place. So you can't, in a way, it's just a pragmatic thing to do. But I realized the Finnish context is very particular. It's got its own little story. It's the story within a story. So it's not quite the same. But I suppose what I'm saying is, I suppose the danger is the question of militarization, because, as I said, the one thing that links the Italian fasces to the Nazi swastika is this notion that might is right. So military use of the swastika, could be seen as, I don't know, the separation of powers is not quite what it seems to be. That what is just a military symbol might also be some kind of political symbol, and if it's a political symbol, are they going to have a coup? And I'm pretty sure that none of that's ever going to happen in Finland. But it's the kind of it's the images that it evokes, you know, of military takeover, or might is right, or, you know, the Schmittian idea of, you know, the sudden, you know, the Napoleon who comes and overturns everything and, you know, creates a state of exception. Because, I mean, the Schmittian thesis was, I think, that what Hitler did was to complete what hadn't been done under the liberalism of Bismarck and the Weimar Republic, which was to move to a state of exception, to move to a distinction between the winners and the losers. And that, I think, you know, if there is an organization like the army that has the power to make sure it wins and somebody else loses, and if they're carrying swastikas, then people might think, whoa, what's going on?
Yeah, in Finnish debates, sometimes some people say like, oh, don't you know the Hindu temples have it? For people who propose prohibiting it, I haven't proposed that. But and then the typical answer is, okay, but the Hindu temples were not in military alliance with Nazi Germany, but Finnish Air Force arguably was.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's obviously, as you said, it's complicated. It seems to be very, very complicated in Finland. I don't understand it completely, not as you do, but it seems like there are anti-colonial swastikas, there are feminist swastikas, there, you know, all kinds. It's kind of like a symbol that's in general use in a way that it isn't maybe in other countries, and in some ways almost like Japan or India in a different way, where you know, this has entered the lifeblood of the culture, and to take it out might seem a little bit artificial, or, you know, again, the cure being worse than the disease. It depends, I suppose. Simple question: how bad is the far right disease in Finland?
Well, that's a big question. There's this whole thing about the Finnish government. Arguably, one of the contexts for the government proposing that they might prohibit at least Holocaust denial and maybe Nazi swastika was that the government was accused of various racist related things, but that would be a long,
I mean, like a marginal far right group. So is it a big thing or not?
It is a big thing, arguably, in the government.
Okay.
So let's not go. Yeah, we can go there. Sure. I mean,
yeah, but I mean, in a way, I suppose I'm talking about what makes people paranoid and fearful.
Yeah. No,
and it's all very well, you know, to say, well, hey, look, we've had this symbol for thousands of years, and you know, you shouldn't be bothered by it, but people are bothered by it, and I think also there's a larger question that I pose in my paper, which is, you know, this question of what happens if you try and put in place this absolute distinction in conditions of liberal democratic states where identity is fluid and you know where increasingly we're accepting, you know, transgender, gay rights, you know, identity is what you make it. And when you have an image that at least seems to evoke a political movement that tried to make an absolute distinction, then I think that's a different thing. And that's why I think, you know, this is why I think it's good to read Schmitt against Césaire, because Schmitt goes, where's the identity? You know, where's this absolutism? And Schmitt and Césaire says, oh, I can tell you where it is. It's over there in colonized Africa. It's, you know, that's where you're going to feel like the big man, because you're the colonizer, and only there are you going to get this absolutism. So yeah.
One terminological question still. Especially in India, many people would say like, hey, come on, Europeans, don't use the term swastika. Swastika is ours. You have your hooked cross. So what's your take on that? Should we be more careful?
I think it's
hooked cross when we...
I mean, I think it's just become the general word, hasn't it? It's difficult to stop people using it. But yes, it's quite right. It's a Sanskrit word. But as I noted vis-a-vis Schliemann, you know, the Sanskrit understanding, it can be co-opted in a European framework that you know, in a sense, this is why I'm saying the simple history that says, hey, Hindu swastika, Nazi swastika, separate them. It's not that easy, because did and others did with him was to Europeanize and give a racial inflection to the Hindu swastika. this is a European version of a Hindu swastika, which is more complex than saying this one's over there and that one.
Yeah. Have you looked at the Hindutva movements in India, like the use of the swastika by arguably racist or racially oriented Hindu groups who use the swastika actually, and their movements have been inspired by
well, it's
European.
strange. That seems to me, maybe, I mean, maybe I'm being one step too far here, but maybe it's an Indianization of the Europeanization. You know, it's kind of like, you know, this maybe isn't the ancient Hindu version. This is a kind of a far right movement, you know, that's inflected by the European use of this as a racist image. I don't know, but I don't know this very well. And to be honest with you, you know, my research has moved on since those days, so it's not something I necessarily keep up with.
Yeah, it seems actually you have a question there from Somani Rahul. The swastika is not banned in the UK. What is the debate in the UK about banning the swastika?
There isn't one, as far as I know. There isn't a debate. It's just, I mean, I think, it's when I noted in my book in the incident in Holland in 1993, I also noted that the far right at that time in the UK was beginning to use the symbol of the swastika again. But I don't think, and I could be wrong, there is a lot of use of that in Britain right now. I certainly haven't seen it in the media, so maybe it's just not seen to be a problem. And of course, we have a huge Indian population in Britain, and I think people think, well, yeah, that's associated with Hindus and their culture. You know, that's fine by us. So I don't think it's seen as a problem in the UK.
Yes, I think now Somani already started. We can also take more questions from everyone. See, Erki.
And the use of the swastika in India is used by the RSS, the Hindu nationalist organization, which can be certainly qualified as a fascist movement. So can you make the distinction between an Indian swastika and a European swastika at all?
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. I think I'm agreeing with you on this. I think that in some senses, we live post World War II in a globalized environment in which it's entirely possible that the Hindu swastika can get Europeanized and racialized by Schliemann, and then taken up by the Nazis, and then re-imported into somebody else's symbology. So yeah, I don't, the question would be how Indian is that latter day version of the swastika in a nationalistic and divisive discourse.
Yeah, wouldn't that be appropriation of what is undoubtedly a very ancient symbol in India, though not the most ancient in the world, but like, a couple of 1,000 years at least, where our findings, Indians tend to give bigger numbers on when the first swastikas appeared in the Indus Valley and all there, but and then you have a racist or communalist, as they would say in India, perhaps RSS kind of movements that were literally inspired by German Nazi movements also in the 1930s. So it's a good way of putting it, how ideas travel back and forth.
Yes, exactly. And I think not many people know the piece of the history that was the Europeanization of the Hindu swastika by Schliemann and others. That's a piece of the jigsaw they don't know. And if you look at that, and then the re-importation of that into, first of all, Germanic mystical groups, and then into the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, and then Hitler going, yeah, this is more than a party symbol. This is a political community. This is where we can make with democracy. And nobody had done that until he came along. That's what intrigues me. It's the break with democracy. It's the political community that is founded on this distinction between the winner and the loser. You know, because you just can't have that distinction as the basis of a democracy. You've got to, you know, it points beyond it. And this is why I think we've got to distinguish swastika vis-a-vis nationalism from Nazi swastika as the idea of a political community in which the winners are, as it were, inside the swastika and the losers are outside the swastika. And that's why I think it's very important to focus on the Nazi flag as crucial to understanding the whole movement and what it was about and what it did.
So how, on the one hand, the way the Nazi party adopted the swastika, arguably in 1920, you refer to a meeting also, I think September 12th in 1919, where it had been proposed, but you know, let's say early 1920s. But then it was used as a political symbol in anti-Semite use before that.
Yeah.
And to what extent does Hitler and the Nazi party make the swastika into that radically anti-democratic thing? And to what extent was the use, which was not the only use of the swastika before that, but the more hardcore anti-Semitic or racist use of the swastika, how much did that already contain it, and how much Hitler just appropriated it? Well,
he appropriated it, but he reinvented it. Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying. He was the person that said, "Oh, this," in a sense, he had to be inspired by the example of Italian fascism. Say, well, how do you move beyond the space of democracy? How do you institute a situation? Because it wasn't. This is the key thing. It wasn't simply a continuity with Bismarck's Reich. It was, well, this Reich failed, and this is where I think reading Carl Schmitt is interesting, because this is what Schmitt says. You know, oh, everything failed up to then. The reason it failed was it happened in the context of democracy. And then Hitler moves beyond democracy, and suddenly you can have a clear distinction between the winner and the loser. What Schmitt doesn't say is, this is why I brought in Césaire, is, well, this distinction between the winner and the loser, where are you going to find it? You're going to find it in colonialism. And of course, Schmitt wouldn't say that.
Yes. Do I see others asking questions there? Let me ask then one detail there you mentioned in your talk about, was it how in Germany it suddenly, then when it became in the early 1930s, a symbol that was used from wallpapers to children's toys. And then somehow there were these also legal, this sort of dignity law on the uses of the swastika by Goebbels, where it was its use was regulated. My understanding was that in order that people wouldn't use it so much. And it reminded me of, in Finland, something I found in the newspaper archives here was in 1928, a businessman called Bruno Lukander was commenting about toys. He was CEO or something of Aero, the civil aviation company in Finland, and he commented that we should make sure that every toy store manager understands the absolute necessity of putting a blue swastika in every toy airplane they sell to children in Finland.
Oh,
so it seems like, you know, your example sounded like swastika needed to be made into something not so mundane, but something dignified. And I don't know if that implied avoiding its use in toys, whereas here there was this total.
Well, I mean, this is it. This is it. You were, I mean, I suppose with the toy, you're still in the space of democracy, aren't you? You're, you know, it's a bit like the Tory party used to have the Union Jack flag as part of their logo, you know, but then, you know, Stormzy goes to Glastonbury and has a black Union Jack on a bulletproof vest. You know, this symbol is going to move around. You know, in a democratic space, it does move around, it gets changed. Whereas I think what was going on with Goebbels and the law for the protection of symbols was this defense of this idea of an absolute political community, this absolute distinction. And therefore, if you have, it's rather, black humor to think of some kid with a football with a swastika on it, having it ripped out of his hands by a policeman, but this maybe is what happened, I don't know. But it's that idea that, the object, is sold to anyone. Whereas the lapel badge, badges you as a member of this political community. And that's what I think the Nazis were aiming for. And that's why I'm saying this question of branding is tricky, because we're used to national branding. There's a Finnish national brand, things that people recognize as being good about Finland, et cetera, et cetera. But, that's, again, within the space of democracy, but really you can't say, oh, the Nazis really tainted the German brand. They didn't want the German brand to exist. They wanted this rolling program of war and conquest, Lebensraum, and they wanted this absolute distinction.
Yeah.
There are some questions to Malcolm in the chat.
Yes.
There's a question, and Sirka is raising a hand here while we chat. Please, Sirka. We don't hear you, Sirka.
Now you hear me.
Yes.
Yes, we do. Hello, Sirka.
Hello, Malcolm. What about exports of swastika in the 1930s and 1940s in neighboring countries where they had victorious nationalist parties around? I have paid attention to one export which is still in use. That's the Ukrainian Ukrainian nationalist Ukrainian Nationalist Party, which was formed in 1930s, and it used a symbol, an icon that is like a twisted swastika. Have you paid attention to that?
Not to this one. No, I mean, I know, for example, there was a South African racist group that used a very similar color scheme and similar image with the same symmetry.
Ah, okay. So, but I'm wondering because it's not too much like a swastika, this OUN symbol, and it has been used now during this terrible war. And I'm not saying that OUN now would be fighting. Just wanting to be victorious over some groups they didn't like. They are really, I say this, they are fighting for the freedom and independence of their country. But still, I think the connection is interesting.
Yes, I think so. It does tend to get adapted or adopted in various ways by far-right groups, and really? Yeah, the swastika, sometimes the symmetry is often the same, but the shape is changed or the colors change. Sometimes the colors are the same, or it's kind of how can I put it, somewhat disguised or dissimulated. So it's less obvious that it relates to a Nazi swastika, but certainly there are far-right groups around the world who use, and America as well, who use versions of it.
Also in Finland, there one group that was prohibited by law, and there's actually a court case going on about their use of the swastika. The case was dismissed in the defense won the first round, and because they were using clearly Nazi swastikas, but they sometimes use other symbols that might be a little bit, maybe Sirka was referring to Stepan Bandera's
yeah, that's it.
Symbol, arguably Nazi influenced, at least political.
By the way, Teivo, just to go back to commerce for a minute, I don't know whether you know this, but there was also in the Italian fascist context somebody came up with a fascist perfume.
Ah, okay, all right, yes, yes.
With the fasces on the bottle.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know what it smelled like, but there you go.
What about this fasces in Italy? Has there been a boomerang effect?
No, not at all. This is what I argued, because, like I say, you can see the fasces on the Washington Memorial in America. I think what I describe with the Italian fascism is you've got the same emphasis on violence, on force, on might is right.
Mm.
What you have in the Italian context is a continuity of what you might call hyper-nationalism. Whereas in the Nazi context, there's this idea of going beyond nationalism, going beyond German nationalism to, you know, a community that's founded not on the notion of nation, but of race, racial distinction.
Yeah.
You know, this fantasy that you could found an entire, what used to be a country could now be a simple distinction between Aryans and others. And of course, what this meant in terms of how World War II unfolded was that some people were more or less Aryan than others, and the Nazis regarded the populations of Eastern Europe as being lesser and more able to be enslaved, and the populations of Western Europe as suitable to have puppet governments, which could function in a quasi-autonomous sense. So, you know, this idea of the distinction inflected everything they did. Even, you know, how they organized the areas they conquered, as I said, enslavement in the East and puppet government in the West.
Mm.
Yeah. Now that Sirka brought up Ukraine, which is a tricky subject, and Historians Without Borders have had several events, I think, on historians, Russian, Ukrainian, and all that before the latest developments in the war and all that. A trivia question that can show how heated the sentiments about the topic are, and a trivia question. We were talking about the ancient Hindu symbolism, and you ask people, do you know where the oldest swastika used that has ever been discovered is? Most people would probably say India, right? And the correct question, and please don't tell Mr. Putin, is Ukraine. Yeah.
Is it mammoth tusk?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Fertility signs, some dated around 15,000 years ago. So it's the oldest.
It's a mammoth ivory, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when mammoths were still moving around, somebody took a piece of one and put a swastika on it. So it's very, very, very old. It's a very, you know, when you think about it, it's very basic. And of course, often people attribute it to the notion of the sun and the sun moving through the sky. It's seen as a solar symbol. I describe in my book, there's a kind of a film by Sam Fuller, the American film director, called Verboten. And he has an American soldier in Germany after World War II, when the war is over and Americans are, among the German population. And one American soldier points to a Nazi swastika and says, "Hey, that's an old Indian symbol that Hitler took from us." And then you think, well, hang on, didn't you take that from the native Indians yourselves? You know, so it's the attempt to kind of, I suppose what I'm saying is the attempt to place it and say, you took it, it's ours. Often when you start looking at why it's yours, you may have taken it from someone else. But I think I'm glad that Teivo came up with the ultimate example, you know, the one we can't argue with, which is 15,000 years ago, somebody, you know, took a piece of a mammoth and put a swastika on it. So it's very, very old.
Yeah, it was called, I don't know how familiar you are in the interpretations on what it meant in history. One of the most important moments was around 95 in the United States Natural History Museum, or what would be the Smithsonian Institute. There was this book short book. It's still available somewhere on the swastika. They called it the oldest symbol in the world. And it established, my reading at least, is that interpretation established the swastika as a sign of luck. That was seen as among the many, the sun and fertility and this and that, and we will never know. We have no way of discovering what was meant by the people who thousands of years ago, sketch it somewhere. And there were fascinating debates also. Is it diffusion, or is it like separately invented symbol in different parts? That book in 1895 opted for
Wilson. That's Wilson.
Yeah, Wilson's book.
Wilson's. Yeah, although he goes crazy eventually. Obviously, as you will if you study this for too long, he goes crazy and starts seeing swastikas on the carpet as well. So
yeah,
begins to see them everywhere. But yeah, that's why I think one reason why this question of meanings is difficult to manage, and that's why I brought in my book the anthropologist Dan Sperber, who says, well, what is a symbol? A symbol is a landmark. A symbol is something that organizes space for you. It's something that carves up the world somehow. And it's not, you shouldn't ask what does a symbol mean. You should say, how does it work? What does it do in terms of your perception, your sense of space, your sense of where you are, who you are, so forth and so on. So I think this is why I think this anthropological view of the symbol enables you to talk about design. And again, the Nazi use of the swastika in dispersed across social space, as flooding the visual environment, as occupying the world, and it was hoped the space of conquest, of Nazi conquest. So it's not just simply what it may mean. It is how it is used and in what context and what kind of world of perception it creates. And finally, Leni Riefenstahl's film, where the swastika is very much used to identify with Hitler as leader. And you begin with the image of Hitler descending on the plane, and repeatedly you get this switching between Hitler and symbol. And this was, of course, part of Hitler's strategy, because he would often settle these debates, say, between Goebbels and Rosenberg by saying, Goebbels was saying, hey, well, maybe metropolitan avant-garde art's okay. And Rosenberg would say, no, it's all got to be Völkisch and rural. And Hitler would say, you're both wrong. All art should worship me. All art should serve me. So again, it's this idea of, an absolute racial distinction in the swastika linked to an absolute leader in Hitler. And that's what this film creates, this sense of a switching between Hitler and the swastika.
Now that you mentioned, and you mentioned before, the some design aspects there and how it seems, what do you make, for you, how different is it when it sort of whirls clockwise or anti-clockwise, and that distinction?
I didn't really bother that too much. I mean, you find it both ways in Buddhism. It's not, I think, it was, I think in a sense, the way that the Nazis had it rightward facing on a slant gives it a kind of modernist dynamic.
Okay.
It looks both ancient and also modern and dynamic, So I think it, I don't think there's any particular superstition about, which way around you turn it. But I think you find it in both ways in Buddhism, for example, often on the chest, at the middle of the chest of the Buddha.
Yeah. In Finland, it's actually in history politics of Finland and collective memory of Finland, there's this funny thing that you ask Finnish people on the street, we might even ask it here among the Finns, and what's the difference between the Finnish swastika and the, for example, used by the Air Force, and the Nazi swastika. And just about everyone would tell you the other one goes clockwise and the other one anti-clockwise. The funny thing is, it doesn't.
Yeah, I know.
But everybody thinks it does. Everybody has a memory.
Yes.
I mean, everybody. I'm exaggerating here, but many people have this idea that ours goes anti-clockwise.
Yeah,
it doesn't. But
no.
But so it's
I know it's kind of like the assumption that again, it's like this idea that it'll mean something different if you put it the other way around. Well, no, it won't. Not necessarily. It won't mean anything different. It's simply a different way of using it. But I think the right word turning one often, at least to our eyes, looks more dynamic.
Yeah. Okay. There's a question from Heta here in the chat. In Finland, in public discussions and general understanding of history, there seems to be an understanding of the swastika as a Hindu symbol and then as a Nazi symbol, and not so much concerning the modern history in the late 19th and early 20th century. Is this also so for the UK?
I think I can put it, obviously, I think the swastika matters more in Finland. It's more part of the culture in Finland. Whereas, as I said, in Britain, we've got a huge Hindu population and Hindu worshipping population. We've got a Hindu prime minister. This is, in a sense, it's kind of seen as theirs. And when you have the far right groups, but as I said, I don't think they're seen as much of a threat at the moment, at least. Whereas, sorry, what was the question again?
Like whether in the UK there's this debate in the history of the UK whether.
Oh, I think no. The understanding. I don't think no. I think I don't think people really understand or have, apart from people who read my book, have grasped the whole issue with Schliemann. I think somebody wrote another book recently, quoting me and being very nice about my work, about Schliemann in particular, and Schliemann coming to London and showing these things in London. But I don't think there's a general, I think, as I said, I think it's an either or. It's either Hindu or Nazi. The whole question of them, that there might be a kind of Europeanized version of the Hindu swastika. No, I don't think people grasp that at all.
Yeah, well, in Finland there is this thing about the Finnish swastika, but then that's something different. But often this Nazi, as Heta pointed out, either Nazi or Hindu, that's quite prevalent there. Let me see if we have more questions. Anyone? Comments, questions? Is Pertti raising a hand? Or yes, please. Oh, we can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Open your microphone, Pertti.
Okay. Now you can. Okay. Yes. Malcolm, I had a question actually to Malcolm, but in a way you answered already. But let's put it once again, because you heard there was explanation the Finnish theory of swastika. It's a sincere, it's a true story in the Finnish mind. But my experience, 44 years in diplomacy in various parts of the world, is that this explanation, the Finnish explanation of swastika, sells very poorly in the big world, very poorly. So it is more of a burden than a positive symbol of national pride. Yeah. And we may have our own theory, which is unfortunately not understood elsewhere, outside the borders of this little tiny Nordic country. So would it therefore be wiser to just wipe off this unnecessary national branding? This is my own feeling, and I hope you can give me direct answer, because the pluses, would you add up the pluses and minuses of the present situation today in today's modern political history, where swastika is closely identified, if not only very closely identified with Hitler and Nazism, then my conclusion is that the minuses are much more than the pluses.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, I think obviously there's a domestic aspect to this, and the question is how much does it get broadcast beyond the domestic? But in a sense, I think it would help more if people understood more about the effects of colonialism on Western societies, because then they would understand, in some senses, what the whole context of Nazism was. Because like I say, often, I think what doesn't help, obviously, Finns when they go abroad and they talk about their own use of it in their own nation is this kind of idea that, well, Nazism was an absolute aberration, and we can't touch it. It's toxic. Whereas I think this is why I brought in Aimé Césaire, because Aimé Césaire is saying, well, this is what came back at you. This is what came back to Europe. This is what you were exporting. This is what, and this sense of an absolute identity, the winner and the loser. This is what you were doing in Africa. This is what you were doing elsewhere, and it came back to you. So I think a deeper understanding of the legacy of communism might help people understand that this taboo is not what it seems. So I suppose I would say a bit of push and pull. Okay, maybe the Finns can recognize they're having a hard time selling this to the rest of the world, but also I think the rest of the world should understand that they're not as this taboo, this kind of hygienic distinction is not as clear cut as it seems. That it's not a history where you have a whole pile of good and one bad.
Yep.
It's not like that. So it's more complex, but again, complexity is hard to sell.
In Finland, actually, just to add a footnote there, some people for example, director of the Air Force Museum once said in an interview that actually the problem is that even if it might be embarrassing because people don't, you have these difficult questions and they don't understand what it is. But if we get rid of it, if we, the Air Force, if we let go, then it might seem as if we confess that there was something bad about it after all, and since there isn't, we shouldn't take it away. It kind of makes sense. They actually did take away from the Air Force Command, who are the guys and girls these days who visit other countries more. So obviously if they go to Germany before or Israel, it's, normally they would have swastikas here. I think they took them away there, but normally they would have them. But then the official explanation was that they got bored of having to explain the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy one because, I've learned through you that there's a very particular culture of the use of the swastika in Finland. It doesn't apply anywhere else. It's not the same debate. It's a different debate. But again, I mean, in some ways, I'm against, the government deciding, that everyone should do this or that. It seems a little bit absolutist in its own way. I think the New South Wales example, that's like firefighting. If you have a rise in far-right incidents, you say, well, how do we stop this? Well, simply we fine them a lot of money and we put them in jail if they do this.
Well, let us not forget that Finland has an additional burden with the swastika. We were Waffenbrüderschaft with Germany, not just Germany during the war.
Yeah.
And that doesn't alleviate or make it easier.
Doesn't help. No.
Yeah.
No. I understand that. I mean, yeah. I think it is probably. I mean, as I say, this is why I'm saying that. This is why Carl Schmitt is interesting to read because. It's this question of it's a cliff edge. Schmidt's like describing a cliff edge. You go to the edge of liberalism, then you fall off and you're somewhere else. It's not like you gradually fade off, and suddenly you find yourself as a Nazi. It's right. A cliff edge. And this is why I'm saying this. What intrigues me about what Hitler did was he pushed the whole thing over the cliff. It became.
But Teivo, it is so that it's in the president's flag as well. I mean, the official flag of the president of the republic.
Yes, but there's this sort of visual, let's call it visual Nazi-ness of there are different kinds of swastikas. So this one has the hooks are shorter. So it's like this thing in the UK, would you call it fitfold or something like that?
Yeah.
And so yes, it's arguably hooked cross or swastika, but when the hooks are very small, the visual impact is different from, let's say, the Air Force uses.
I think the first time I saw swastika was because I read the Just So stories by Rudyard Kipling. And Kipling has a drawing of a rock with a swastika on it. And obviously he got that because he was a colonialist in India. So he took it from the Indian context and brought it into a British one. And, you know, it was up to World War II often used worldwide as a symbol of good luck or, you know, a blessing or so forth and so on. And this is, of course, what it means in Sanskrit, Swastika. So in some ways, it was eliminated in Germany for, it seems, you know, pragmatic reasons. It's banned in Germany. Whether it should be banned elsewhere, I don't think so. I think it's too universal an image. You know, it's too much something that, I mean, my wife got a scarf in Liberties the other day, and she looked at it and said, "Is a swastika pattern on it, Malcolm?" I went, "I don't think so. Don't worry about it." It's easy to see it everywhere. It's easy to see it everywhere, and you know, you can go crazy. So I'm not for banning swastikas. That's stupid. But I think, you know, it maybe you just have to kind of work on this political containment strategy in the way they do in New South Wales and say, well, look, if the far right is rising, we have to find a way to contain them. You know, and in a sense, it's not about the swastika. It's about the nature of those far right groups. It's about their attitude to social division and the way they want to pursue that division within a liberal society that has to be in some sense contained through fines or jail terms.
I have a vague memory that Kipling himself maybe said sometime in the 1930s that he's stopped using it as his own kind of symbol in his books and something because of the Nazis. And there were many examples. Indigenous groups in the United States, Native American groups would stop using it because they said, okay, it's too much now, late 30s or something, like very early 40s. So Finland was one of the, Finland and Mongolia were sort of arguably the two countries where some kind of state use of the symbol continued even throughout the 40s and afterwards. Sirka has a question there, a comment or something. And Mike?
I will react to Teivo's idea that the swastika should not be forbidden. I have seen the extreme right young people spreading stickers with swastikas around in Helsinki, in metro stations and so on. It's a couple of years ago, but still. And that was bad because they were provoking each other for anti-immigrant hate action and so on. But also I was offended. I thought of it brought to my mind concentration camps and the ovens and so on. And I didn't like. I thought I don't want to see this. I want it to be forbidden.
Yeah, no, I think but I think it's not you're not banning the image. You're banning it because then again, as in New South Wales, they had to say, well, look, you know, if you're a Hindu, Buddhist, or a Jain, then you're going to use this. It's a religious symbol to you. We're not going to stop you doing that. But what we do is stop the use of these far right uses of the symbol in public space because they are inflicting this on others. You know,
there just to respond to Sirka who was responding me is, first of all, I don't think everything that offends us should be dealt with criminal law. So the fact that something offends someone is not sufficient reason for using criminal law to ban something. But beyond that, I think actually it's more complicated than either or. I do think swastika use, the Nazi swastika use, may make criminal law sense in context, like somebody, let's say a skinhead is kicking somebody in her or his head. And the fact whether at the same time waving a swastika or not is probably something relevant for the criminal law interpretation of the event, whether it's an incident of racially motivated crime of hate, even if the swastika itself would not be banned in a German-style prohibition. And in the same way, you know, people doing, neo-Nazis doing things, and when they use the swastika, I think it makes sense, even in interpretations of current criminal law of Finland, to see this as something that might help the courts to constitute whether it's a certain kind of criminal offense or not. But so I think that's fine. But then a sort of German style, more overall prohibition of the swastika, I think is problematic, mostly for freedom of expression.
I think the Germans did this for their own reasons. But I suppose the greater threat to my mind is where I ended the paper, with this question of national renewal or greatness. And we've seen many examples of this lately. I mean, basically, it's the same old formula. Somebody says, "Oh, democracy is sick. Look at all the things that go wrong in democracy. Look at all the ways in which people, you know, mess about with their identity and don't have good lives. And if only we had a more absolute version of identity based possibly on the former greatness of our nation, this would be helpful." And this is why I'm saying it never is. You know, because it's the cliff edge. You know, you think, oh, well, you know, that they seem to be moral, Christian, God-fearing folk, I'll give them my vote. You know, you might give them your vote, but in giving them your vote, you've also given away your membership of a liberal democratic space, because they're not interested in that space. And of course, that's exactly what happened with Nazism. They get voted in, and then they abolish voting. You know, so.
Yeah. Maybe another reflection on Torsti's excellent comment and question about the pros and cons is that, at least here in Finland, it seems people sometimes confuse, like when you ask, does it make sense for, let's say, the Air Force of Finland to use the swastika? Does it serve the purpose of defending the nation? What are the pros and cons? It's a very different question from the debate on should it be made a criminal offense if somebody publicly uses the swastika. And at least I've noted in the public debate that sometimes people have difficulties in distinguishing two very different takes on the swastika. And I think does it make sense for the military to use it in order to, you know, do what their terms of reference are, defending the nation.
But as I said, you know, as long as the military are contained within the separation of powers, all very well. But it's the very breaking of that separation of powers that you know causes the paranoia.
Yeah, though in Finland we don't have that kind of. I don't think that's a concern here. I don't think what do other Finns here think? I don't think people think that if the Air Force uses the swastika, it would somehow militarize society in like breaking the civilian military border. It's perhaps more like, is it stupid to use the swastika because, you know, within NATO, our new NATO allies, some of them really don't like and will not understand why we want to insist on the use of the swastika. A counter argument of the military is that because Germans and Dutch and French and others think it's weird, they don't understand our argument, so they think we are stubborn people, that we cling to the swastika even if the world doesn't understand. So this shows the world how brave we are. We are brave and stubborn. So that would be a positive side in military sense.
Well, I
don't buy that argument, but it is one argument.
If I may venture into a political statement here, you know, far more stupid than anything that any Finn could possibly do was Brexit, where a nation decided in the cause of demented nationalism to make life worse for everyone. But that's just my view.
All right, so we're coming to, I guess soon to a moment where we had thought we might start ending this conversation. We can still see what does Heta say as the co-chair here of the meeting. Heta, any comments by Heta still here to start concluding, and maybe Malcolm wants to say a few concluding words, and if somebody has something very urgent, I guess we can be flexible with a few more minutes. Or what do you think, Heta?
I'm flexible, of course, if there are participants who need to leave, or for example, Malcolm or many other of our speakers, and of course we can end. But there was a comment by Jukka Kortti and by myself actually as well in the chat, which can also be just left, there, however you want.
Oh, you can bring them. Let's bring them up. Okay. Now.
Well, there was, or did Malcolm have any?
No, I just think that it strikes me that this debate is very polarized. It's either or. It's either and it's the taboo surrounding Nazism, and it's as if if you just look at the swastika, then you say, well, how do I tell the Nazi swastika from other swastikas? Whereas I'm saying, look at the flag, look at the design, look at the step Hitler took to move beyond this German Volkisch, mystical idea of the Aryan swastika to something where this word Aryan is what, to ground the whole nation in this distinction was a very strange thing to do. But it's not, and this is why I brought in MSS there, maybe not so strange. It seems strange. It seems strange in Europe, but maybe not in Africa, maybe not in India. So I think we have to, and I think it is very good that we're now in this phase of thinking about decolonization, because it's not simply about, again, banning things or getting rid of things. It's thinking about mindsets and what we haven't understood properly. And to my mind, what we haven't understood is this Europeanization of the Hindu swastika in the 19th century that fed into some of these debates about absolute distinctions and firm distinctions between conquerors and the conquered, which were there in the discourse around Schliemann swastikas at Troy. So I think we have to go deeper into history. And so I suppose what I'm saying is, as I said at the beginning, yeah, if the police want to contain far-right groups in Australia, I'm kind of with them. You got to do practical measures. But in terms of how we understand history, we can't just work with this basic, well, there's this history of the swastika goes back to a mammoth tusk, and the one exception is Nazism. I just don't think that works terribly well. We've got to be a bit more sophisticated than that. So I would end there.
There's, I think that's connected to Heta's question there also in the chat, right, Heta, about using.
Yes, well, I can repeat it. I mean, I didn't have a specific question, more a comment. I can just read it here. Beyond the question of banning or not, as you say, Malcolm, it's also a question of how seriously we see the risk of the extreme right, not just as a historical phenomenon, but as an actual political force in the present day, and whether it is necessary and or useful to go about using legal avenues to stop them from promoting their ideas.
Yeah, I think in some ways it is, but I'd be more like, I don't want to kind of put fear into everyone, but imagine that there's somebody, maybe an oligarch or somebody who runs a global company who's doing the very same thing now that Hitler did back then, and thinking, how can I get to the point of manufacturing an absolute distinction that's going to become the foundation of a political community? To me, that's far more dangerous than, in a sense, as I've argued, what you see in Hitler's description is nationalism, socialism, plus the swastika. And it's this plus the swastika, plus the distinction between the winners and the losers that comes from colonialism, that you see you go over the cliff edge then. And it's what's the current version of that? It's I mean, I don't want to go into detail, but one can see possibly this happening in America, in other countries, this pushing of democracy to the point where it fails and something else takes its place. That's worrying. So yes, I think, you have your own debate in Finland. Yes, containment, but I think far more worrying is this question of what I'm calling the cliff edge, from democracy to something else. And often it's founded on this idea that multiple identities or flux of identity, which is basically what happens in modernity, is a bad thing, and we should find a solution to it.
How would you reflect on the Russian use of the Z symbol?
Oh, well, it just struck me as a kind of quite similar thing. I mean, obviously, it's just a way of telling your tanks from somebody else's tanks, but it did seem to connote some kind of, because a lot of this Russian discourse is absolutist. We're always the winners. They're always the losers. It's not simply we're going to win this battle. It's like saying something about being Russian makes us winners. And that's dangerous. As soon as you say something about being British makes us like this, what a stupid thing to say. But if it becomes a kind of, a way of promoting yourself or internal propaganda, where the Russian people themselves begin to believe this stuff, then it's become toxic.
Yeah. Let's still take the last question I see here now is by Jukka Kortti, who may have left himself. It's a comment, it could be taken as a question about Finnish fanzine, a magazine about swastikas in the history of pop music.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, we have the punk use of the swastika and other, I haven't seen the magazine he refers to. Do you have any reflection?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think punk, in that case, it was just something that was, intended to be so disgusting you couldn't, it was like a kind of barrier between you and the rest of the world. What's the one thing that everyone's going to recoil from? What's one thing that everyone's going to say, oh God, not that, And I think in some ways it's this, it's in one way, it's just good old shock the bourgeoisie. In another way, it's a sense in which I suppose what it evokes is the idea that democracy is always kind of teetering on an edge, or something can tip it over, or there's a place where things get out of control, maybe. And in punk, there was that sense of, you think you're in control, but actually you're not. You think you've got it sorted, but you haven't. You think you've got your expensive keyboards, but no, all you need is a guitar. So it's that sense of, bringing on chaos, I suppose.
Yeah, there's actually, and this might be towards the end just an anecdote, but in Mongolia, where the swastika has a very special place in the national culture and all that. More than in some other countries, apart from Japan and somewhere else. There's a rock musician, kind of, I don't know how much punk, folk, something performing around 10 years ago, having swastikas as a nationalist symbol. And a Russian diplomat comes on stage, beats him up, and the singer enters in a coma and for like, I don't know, a week or something. So which seemed like a different use in pop music.
Hey, Teivo, which is more dangerous, the belief the Russians are always going to win the fight, or the swastikas? I don't know, they're both pretty bad.
All right, well, maybe on that happy note, we might be ready to finish here. Pertti Grönholm is telling us also German punks who found the use of swastika in the late 70s counterproductive, since they thought they would attract wrong people. And most importantly, he thanks you, Malcolm,
Oh, thank you.
We all thank you.
Thought-provoking discussion, though he might thank us.
Well, it's interesting for me because, again, as I mentioned, I wrote that book 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It was my first book, and you know, it's still. I mean, I think one of the most the best occasions, just to close, that happened with it around this book was in 2006. I got a call from Radio 3, and they said, "Are you the Dr. Quinn that did the book on the swastika?" I said, "Yes, I am." And they said, "Can you come and talk about the Tory party logo?" And I said, "Of course I can." And what was funny was in 2006, the Tories had a green tree, and the Liberal Democrats had a bird, and Labour had a rose. And I thought, everyone has retreated from nationalism. It was the most non-nationalistic period in British politics ever. Everyone was green, everyone was in a garden, and nobody was mentioning the flag or anything else. And it was like, and then of course, and this is the danger, you know, 2006, everything is green and neutral and kind and liberal. And then you have Brexit. And, you know, in the space of a few years, something else. So, you know, we need to be on our guard against these incursions, I suppose, that, you know, upend our lives and change the way we have to behave. So, you know, now I can't stay in Europe for more than 3 months. What is that about? That happened to me. Something altered, and it was because of a political change in the weather that occurred. So, yeah, we've got to be on our guard.
All right, I think this is a good moment to stop for a moment, and I hope you will be able to stay in Europe, where I guess we are one of these days when we might hopefully organize something again around the swastika. Hopefully get you to see the Finnish swastikas. I'll take you to swastika tour of Helsinki.
I would like that very much. Thank you.
All right.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Bye-bye.
Bye.